Welcome to Farcical Fears, where the impossible becomes undeniable, and the highways hide secrets darker than the midnight sky. I'm your host, and tonight, we're diving into the shadowed world of America's loneliest roads, where 18-wheelers carry more than just cargo, they carry the weight of the supernatural. What you're about to experience are 15 documented encounters that made seasoned truckers abandon their routes forever. Collected from CB radio transmissions that should never have been recorded, police reports that were buried in bureaucratic silence, and testimonies from drivers who swore they'd take these stories to their graves. But they spoke to me in the darkest hours of truck stops and rest areas. When the veil between worlds grows thin, and the highway becomes a conduit for forces beyond our understanding. These aren't urban legends or campfire tales, these are real events that occurred on real highways, witnessed by real people, whose lives were forever changed by what they encountered in the dead of night. If you're easily disturbed by the impossible made real, turn back now. But if you're ready to discover why some truckers refuse to drive certain routes after sunset, why CB Channel 19 goes silent at specific mile markers, and why experienced drivers with decades of perfect safety records suddenly quit without explanation, then buckle up. Because we're about to take a journey down the highway from hell, where every mile marker could be your last. Story 1. The Repeating Mile Marker. Marcus Big Mac McDonald had been hauling freight across America's highways for 15 years without a single accident, violation, or unexplained incident. His perfect safety record was his pride, his W900 his second home, and Route I-80 through Nevada his bread and butter. On January 15th, at 2:47 a.m., with the temperature gauge reading -12 degrees and not a soul for miles in either direction, Marcus was about to experience something that would challenge everything he believed about reality. The night started routine enough. Marcus was 3 hours into his haul from Reno to Salt Lake City, hauling electronics for a tech company, staying connected with his wife Sarah through Bluetooth, while Lynyrd Skynyrd kept him company on the radio. The Nevada desert stretched endlessly on both sides, moonless void, broken only by his headlights cutting through the darkness like twin sabers. At exactly 2:51 a.m., his headlights illuminated a green highway sign, mile marker 347. Nothing unusual. Just another numbered post marking his progress across the Silver State. Marcus glanced at his odometer, noted his position, and continued driving at a steady 65 miles per hour. 4 minutes later, at 2:55 a.m., his headlights caught another green sign emerging from the darkness ahead, mile marker 347. Marcus blinked hard, rubbed his eyes, and checked his coffee cup, still half full, still warm. Must be fatigued playing tricks. He'd seen mile marker 348, surely. But as the sign grew larger in his windshield, the numbers became unmistakable. 347. The exact same marker. The exact same positioning. Even the same small dent in the lower right corner he'd noticed 4 minutes earlier. What the hell? Marcus muttered, checking his GPS. The screen showed him progressing normally along I-80, having traveled exactly 4.3 miles since the first marker. His odometer confirmed forward movement. His fuel gauge showed the expected consumption. Everything indicated normal travel, except for the impossible repetition of mile marker 347. Marcus keyed his CB radio, eastbound Kenworth, to any westbound traffic you got your ears on. I'm seeing some weird signage out here around mile marker 347. Anyone else notice anything unusual? Static answered him. Not surprising. I-80 through central Nevada was called America's loneliest highway, for good reason. Sometimes you could drive for hours without seeing another vehicle. 4 minutes later, at 2:59 a.m., the headlights illuminated the sign again. Mile marker 347. Same dent, same positioning, same impossible repetition. Marcus pulled over, his hands trembling slightly as he engaged the parking brake. The silence outside was absolute. No wind, no distant traffic, no insects. Just the steady rumble of his diesel engine and the faint whistle of air through his cab vents. He grabbed his flashlight and climbed out into the bitter cold. The mile marker stood exactly where it should, planted firmly in frozen ground. Marcus walked back along the shoulder, his flashlight beam sweeping the darkness for the previous marker, 346 should be 1 mile behind him, but his light found nothing. The highway stretched into absolute blackness, as if the road itself simply ended where his beam couldn't reach. Returning to his truck, Marcus noted something that made his stomach clench: his outside temperature gauge now read -37 degrees, 25 degrees colder than when he'd started this stretch. In 4 minutes. The weather service had called for steady cold, no dramatic temperature drops. Marcus climbed back into his cab and continued eastbound. At 3:03 a.m., mile marker 347 appeared again. And again, at 3:07 and 3:11. Each time identical. Each time impossible. For 3 hours and 47 minutes, Marcus passed mile marker 347 exactly 57 times. His odometer showed 252 miles of forward progress. His fuel gauge dropped accordingly. His dash clock advanced normally. His GPS maintained that he was traveling east on I-80 at legal speed. But mile marker 347 kept appearing every 4 minutes, like a supernatural metronome, marking time and hell. At 6:34 a.m., as the first pale light of dawn crept over the Sierra Nevada mountains, Marcus passed mile marker 347 for the 58th time. But this time, as the sun's rays hit his rearview mirrors, the marker didn't repeat. At 6:38 a.m., his headlights found mile marker 348, then 349, then 350. Marcus pulled over again, his heart pounding, according to his GPS. He was now 200 miles south of where he should be near Tonopah, instead of approaching the Utah border. His fuel consumption matched a 200-mile detour. Not the 400-plus miles his odometer claimed he'd traveled during the loop. When Marcus finally reached his destination 12 hours behind schedule, he reported the incident to his dispatcher, who chalked it up to fatigue and suggested Marcus take a few days off. But Marcus knew what he'd experienced. The truck's GPS system showed a 3-hour gap in positioning data from 2:51 a.m. to 6:34 a.m., as if his truck simply hadn't existed during those hours. The Nevada Department of Transportation had no explanation. The National Weather Service confirmed no temperature fluctuations below -12 degrees that night. And mile marker 347 on I-80. According to state records, it's been in the same location since 1974, marking the same stretch of highway that Marcus has driven hundreds of times before and since. But Marcus never drove that section at night again, because sometimes, on the loneliest highways in America, time itself gets lost and takes you with it. Story 2. The CB Static Voice. Sarah Highway Angel Torres earned her CB handle honestly. In 8 years of long-haul trucking, she'd pulled 17 stranded motorists from snowbanks, called in 12 accidents before first responders arrived, and talked 3 suicidal drivers off highway overpasses through nothing but her CB radio and genuine compassion. On Route 50, through Nevada officially designated the loneliest road in America, Sarah was often the only voice of help for hundreds of miles. February 22nd brought the kind of late winter storm that transforms Nevada's desert highways into Arctic nightmares. Light snow had been falling since Carson City, but by 11:23 p.m., as Sarah guided her Peterbilt 379 through the darkness toward Ely, the flakes had thickened into a white curtain that reduced visibility to mere yards ahead of her headlights. Sarah knew Route 50 like her own heartbeat. She'd driven this stretch through central Nevada over 200 times, could navigate it in her sleep. But tonight felt different. The usual scattered lights from distant ranch houses were invisible through the snow, and her CB radio, chattering with distant truckers and local ranchers, carried only the hollow whistle of atmospheric interference. At 11:31 p.m., the static broke. Southbound Kenworth, you got your ears on. The voice crackled through the speaker, male, older, with the distinctive cadence of a veteran trucker. But something about the transmission felt wrong, distant and hollow, like a voice echoing from the bottom of a well. Sarah keyed her microphone. This is Highway Angel in the southbound Peterbilt. A copy, driver. What's your 20-mile marker? 73 coming up, southbound. You need to know about black ice on the bridge approach. Slicker than owl shit on a pump handle. Nearly put me in the ditch. Sarah checked her GPS. Mile marker 73 was exactly 12 minutes ahead at her current speed. The bridge crossing over Austin Creek, a narrow span she'd crossed hundreds of times. I appreciate the heads up, driver. What's your call sign? Haven't heard any southbound traffic tonight. Static answered her. Then, after a long pause, the voice returned. Just watch yourself on that bridge, Angel. Black ice formed up sudden-like. Wouldn't want to see you get hurt. Something about the phrasing sent a chill through Sarah's cab. The CB terminology was old-fashioned, from an earlier era of trucking, and the voice knew her handle. Though she hadn't used it on this trip, she'd simply identified herself as southbound Peterbilt. Sarah tried different channels, 19, 17, 21, even the emergency channel 9. The voice followed her to each frequency, always with the same warning about mile marker 73, always with the same hollow, distant quality that made her skin crawl. Driver, what's your location now? Sarah asked. I'm not seeing any taillights or running lights ahead of me. Don't worry about where I am, the voice replied. Just worry about that bridge. 3 vehicles went off tonight already. County sheriff's got his hands full pulling cars out of the creek. Sarah's CB radio crackled and popped, then displayed something impossible according to her radio's digital readout. The transmission was originating from her own truck. The signal strength indicator showed the voice was coming from inside her own cab. At 11:43 p.m., Sarah's headlights illuminated the green reflective sign, mile marker 73. Ahead, the Austin Creek Bridge approached, its concrete deck glistening ominously in her headlights. Sarah downshifted, engaged her engine brake, and reduced speed to 35 miles per hour. The bridge surface was a sheet of black ice. Her tires found no traction. The Peterbilt began to slide sideways, its 80,000-pound mass carrying it inexorably toward the concrete barrier. Sarah fought the wheel, pumped her brakes, and felt the familiar terror of a jackknife beginning. But her reduced speed, prompted by the mysterious CB warning, gave her just enough control to straighten out and cross the bridge safely. On the far side, Sarah pulled into the emergency lane and activated her hazard lights, her hands shaking. As she keyed the CB, "This is Highway Angel. Just crossed mile marker 73 bridge. Confirming black ice conditions. Driver who warned me, thank you. You probably saved my life." Silence. Not even static. Sarah tried every channel. Nothing but atmospheric noise. 20 minutes later, as Sarah continued south on Route 50, she encountered the accident scene. 3 vehicles, a sedan, an SUV, and a pickup truck had skidded off the icy bridge and crashed into Austin Creek. Emergency responders were winching the last vehicle out of the water. A Nevada Highway Patrol officer flagged Sarah down. "You see this happen?" the officer asked. "No, sir, but I got a CB warning about black ice. Probably saved me from joining them." The officer checked his notes. Accident started at 9:15 p.m. Ice formed real sudden when the temperature dropped. We've been here for 2 hours. Sarah's blood chilled. Her mystery CB contact had warned her about accidents that were already being cleaned up, described conditions that had existed for hours. Yet the warnings had been specific, accurate, and perfectly timed to save her life. The next morning, Sarah called the Nevada DOT to report the black ice conditions and thank them for any highway safety broadcasts. The dispatcher confirmed no official warnings had been issued for Route 50 that night. Curious now, Sarah contacted the NI County Historical Society. A librarian named Mrs. Henderson spent 3 days researching Sarah's experience. On February 25th, Mrs. Henderson called back with information that made Sarah pull over to write down every detail. "I found something interesting," Mrs. Henderson said. February 22nd, 1973. Exactly 30 years ago, trucker named Billy Iron Eagle Martinez died in a black ice accident at mile marker 73, Austin Creek Bridge. Same bridge you crossed safely. Sarah felt her cab grow cold. What kind of truck was he driving? According to the accident report, a 1972 Kenworth W900. But here's the strange part, witnesses said. Martinez was warning other drivers about ice conditions right up until his accident. He'd been on his CB radio for hours, telling people to slow down for that bridge. Saved at least 6 other vehicles that night before he lost control himself. Sarah stared at her CB radio, its digital display now showing only normal static. Billy Martinez had been warning drivers about black ice on February 22nd for 30 years, reaching across death to prevent other truckers from sharing his fate. Sarah never doubted the supernatural after that night, and every February 22nd since, as she approaches mile marker 73 on Route 50. Her CB radio crackles with a familiar voice. "Southbound Kenworth, you got your ears on. Watch yourself on that bridge, Angel. Wouldn't want to see you get hurt." She always keys back. "Thanks, Iron Eagle. Drive safe out there." And in the static that follows, Sarah swears she can hear the faint sound of a man's grateful laughter, echoing across 3 decades of Nevada nights. Story 3. The Shadow Convoy. Roberto Desert Rat. Gonzalez had been hauling freight through the American Southwest for 22 years, and he knew every mile of desert highway, like the lines on his weathered hands. I-40 through Arizona was his specialty, from the painted cliffs near Flagstaff to the endless expanse approaching New Mexico. Roberto could navigate these routes blindfolded. He'd seen dust storms that blacked out the sun, lightning that split the sky like God's own welding torch, and heat mirages that made lakes appear in the middle of bone-rye desert. But he'd never believed in ghosts. That changed on August 3rd. At 1:15 a.m., under a full moon that turned the Sonoran Desert into a silver dreamscape, Roberto was hauling auto parts from Phoenix to Albuquerque, running slightly ahead of schedule and feeling good about life. His custom Freightliner Cascadia hummed smoothly at 65 miles per hour. The air conditioning kept the cab comfortable despite the 89-degree desert heat, and classic rock from a Flagstaff radio station provided the perfect soundtrack for a peaceful night haul. At mile marker 233, just past Meteor Crater Road, Roberto's headlights caught something unusual ahead: 3 sets of taillights in perfect formation. 3 18-wheelers running convoy, spaced exactly 200 feet apart, maintaining precise 65 miles per hour speed. Nothing unusual about a convoy, except Roberto hadn't seen these trucks approach on the straight, flat desert highway with visibility for miles in every direction. 3 big rigs don't just appear. Roberto keyed his CB radio. "Eastbound convoy. You got a copy? This is Desert Rat in the Freightliner, running behind you." Silence. Not even static. He tried channel 17. Then 21. Nothing. The 3 trucks ahead maintained their perfect formation, their red taillights glowing like eyes in the darkness. Roberto accelerated slightly, closing the gap to get a better look. As he drew nearer, details became visible that made his scalp prickle. The trucks were older models, late 1970s Kenworth W900s and Peterbilt 359s. The kind of classic big rigs you'd see at truck shows, not hauling freight on modern highways. Their chrome gleamed too brightly in the moonlight, and their exhaust stacks seemed to produce no visible diesel smoke, despite the engines clearly running. Roberto pulled into the left lane to pass. Drawing alongside the rear truck, the driver was clearly visible in the cab: a middle-aged man wearing a cowboy hat, hands steady on the wheel, eyes focused ahead. Roberto waved. The driver waved back with a friendly smile. But when Roberto glanced at the truck's license plate, the numbers seemed to shift and blur, like heat waves rising from summer asphalt. For 2 hours, Roberto followed the phantom convoy across the Arizona desert. They maintained perfect speed, never varying by a single mph. They took no rest stops, made no CB contact, and their license plates continued to display numbers that seemed to change whenever Roberto wasn't looking directly at them. At 3:15 a.m., the convoy took an exit Roberto had never seen before. The exit ramp appeared suddenly, marked by a green highway sign reading Desert View Road to 1 mile. Roberto had driven this stretch of I-40 hundreds of times. There was no Desert View Road exit between Flagstaff and Winslow, but his GPS showed the exit clearly, and the 3 trucks ahead were already signaling their turn. Against his better judgment, Roberto followed. Desert View Road led into terrain that shouldn't exist. The landscape gradually changed from typical Sonoran desert to something older, more primal. The asphalt beneath his wheels shifted to an older style of highway: the narrow, rough surface roads from the 1970s. Billboard advertisements along the roadside advertised products that hadn't been sold in decades. 39-cent gasoline, drive-in movies, hotels that had been demolished before Roberto started trucking. The convoy led him for another hour through this impossible landscape, past landmarks that belonged to a different era. Roberto's fuel gauge dropped normally. His odometer recorded the miles. But his CB radio picked up transmissions from truckers discussing CB protocols and slang from 30 years past. At sunrise, the convoy stopped. Roberto found himself at the edge of a massive crash site, 3 burned-out truck frames scattered across a wide ravine. Their metal skeletons twisted and blackened by fire that had consumed them decades ago. A weathered bronze memorial plaque stood nearby, its inscription clearly visible in the dawn light. In memory of 3 drivers who died here, August 3, 1973. James Cowboy Hat, Morrison Kenworth, W900. Miguel Roadrunner Santos, Peterbilt 359, David Nighthawk Chenworth, W900. They died helping others escape a wild fear. Their sacrifice saved 12 lives. Roberto's hands trembled as he read the names. The license plates on the Phantom trucks had been shifting between these 3 drivers' registration numbers. He walked to the edge of the ravine and saw the true 3 truck drivers had died here exactly 30 years ago. And their convoy had been leading Roberto to their memorial. But why? Roberto climbed back into his Freightliner and checked his GPS. According to the satellite positioning, he was exactly where he'd started following the convoy. Still on I-40, near mile marker 233. The detour through impossible landscape had somehow brought him in a perfect circle back to the main highway. His fuel consumption matched the Phantom journey's distance. But according to his GPS, he'd never left I-40. The memorial plaque was real. Roberto called the Arizona Department of Transportation from his cell phone, and they confirmed the 1973 accident. 3 truckers had died fighting a wildfire, using their rigs to block the highway and help evacuate a church bus full of children. The memorial was accessible by a dirt service road, not a paved exit, but Roberto had followed 3 ghost trucks down a highway that existed only in memory, led by drivers who died saving others 30 years ago to the day. As Roberto prepared to continue his haul to Albuquerque, his CB radio crackled to life one final time. 3 voices, warm and friendly. Thanks for visiting us, Desert Rat. Drive safe out there, partner. We're always watching the roads. Roberto never doubted the supernatural after that dawn. And every August 3rd since, as he passes mile marker 233 on I-40, he sees 3 sets of taillights in his rearview mirror. The Phantom convoy still running their eternal route. Still watching over desert highways. Still protecting drivers who travel the lonely roads of the American Southwest. Sometimes being followed by ghosts isn't terrifying. Sometimes it's the most comforting feeling in the world. Story 4. The Backwards Rest Stop. Jennifer Knight Alkim approached trucking differently than most drivers. With a psychology degree from UCLA and 6 years of long-haul experience, she analyzed everything: traffic patterns, weather systems, human behavior at truck stops, and the strange little anomalies that other drivers dismissed as fatigue or imagination. Jennifer documented the unusual, categorized the impossible, and maintained detailed logs of every unexplained experience she encountered on America's highways. None of her analytical training prepared her for what happened at 10:45 p.m. on September 14th, on a rain-slicked stretch of the Oklahoma Turnpike between Tulsa and Oklahoma City. Jennifer was running slightly behind schedule, hauling computer equipment from Dallas to Kansas City, when a combination of light rain and the need for coffee made her decision easy. The Wellston Rest Area appeared in her headlights, standard Oklahoma facility she'd used dozens of times before, well-lit, clean, safe, and equipped with the kind of strong vending machine coffee that kept night drivers alert. The first anomaly appeared as Jennifer parked her Volvo VNL 760. The large digital clock mounted above the main building entrance read 54 minutes and 1 second p.m. Not 10:45 p.m. to 54 minutes and 1 second p.m. with numbers that didn't correspond to any time system Jennifer recognized. She rubbed her eyes, attributed it to fatigue, and climbed out of her cab into the light rain. Inside the rest area building, more anomalies emerged. The vending machine text appeared backwards, EKO, instead of Coke, Sripak, instead of papers. But when Jennifer purchased items, the machines functioned normally, dispensing correct products for correct change. Other visitors to Truckers, a family with children, an elderly couple, moved through the facility in what appeared to be reverse motion, walking backwards, but seeming completely unaware of their unusual locomotion. Jennifer discreetly activated her phone's camera to document the strangeness. The resulting photos showed completely normal activity: forward walking people, correctly labeled vending machines, a standard digital clock reading, 10:47 p.m. Her phone's timestamp confirmed only 2 minutes had passed since her arrival. In the women's restroom, the stall doors were numbered 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 from left to right, instead of the standard 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. The hand dryers operated in reverse instead of blowing warm air. They seemed to suck moisture from Jennifer's hands, leaving them completely dry but oddly cold. The automatic paper towel dispensers fed paper back into themselves, rather than dispensing it. Jennifer's analytical mind raced through possible explanations: carbon monoxide poisoning, a minor stroke, extreme fatigue-induced hallucination, or some kind of elaborate prank. But the phenomena were too consistent, too detailed, and too interactive to be simple hallucinations. Outside, the parking lot's painted lines seemed to curve in impossible directions, creating optical illusions that made Jennifer question her depth perception. The security lights cast shadows that fell upward rather than downward, and the American flag hung limp despite a steady breeze that ruffled Jennifer's hair. Other truckers in the parking lot moved in reverse slow motion, walking backwards too, their rigs climbing down from cabs instead of climbing up, backing out of parking spaces in forward gear. But when Jennifer approached them, they spoke normally and seemed completely unaware of their backwards motion. "Evening," said a driver in a cowboy hat, who appeared to be walking backwards toward his Peterbilt. "Nasty night for driving, ain't it? Have you noticed anything unusual about this rest stop?" Jennifer asked carefully. "Unusual how?" The driver seemed genuinely confused. "Looks normal to me. Clean facilities, good lighting, decent coffee. What more do you need?" Jennifer spent what felt like 15 minutes conducting her investigation, documenting anomalies, and trying to make sense of the backwards rest stop. When she finally returned to her truck, her phone showed 10:47 p.m., only 2 minutes after her arrival, despite her subjective experience of much more time passing. But her truck's electronic logbook told a different story. According to the Qualcomm system, Jennifer's truck had been parked at the Wellston rest area for 6 hours and 13 minutes. Her fuel gauge indicated 6 hours of idling time. The engine temperature and oil pressure readings matched extended idle periods, not a brief 2-minute stop. Jennifer immediately called her dispatcher on the satellite phone. "This is Night Owl. I've got a major discrepancy in my logbook. System shows I've been parked for over 6 hours, but I've only been here a few minutes." "Jennifer, it's 4:58 a.m., her dispatcher replied. "You've been off duty at that rest stop since 10:45 p.m. yesterday. I was about to send someone to check on you." Jennifer stared at her dashboard clock. 4:58 a.m. Somehow 6 hours had passed in what felt like 15 minutes of subjective time. Her carefully maintained mental timeline had been completely disrupted by the backwards rest stop. The security footage, obtained later through a Freedom of Information Act request, showed Jennifer's truck parked normally for exactly 6 hours and 13 minutes. The cameras recorded Jennifer moving at normal speed through the facility, not in the backward slow motion she'd observed in others. To external observers, Jennifer appeared to be the anomaly, moving normally in a backwards. World. Research revealed the Wellston rest area's disturbing history. The facility was built in 1987 on the site of the former Central State Mental Hospital, which operated from 1909 to 1974. The hospital specialized in treating patients with severe temporal and spatial disorientation disorders. Over 2,000 patients died on the grounds. many suffering from conditions that caused them to perceive time and space in reverse patterns. Oklahoma, DOT, records show 47 reported incidents of temporal displacement at the Wellston Rest Area. Since 1987, all incidents involve drivers with analytical, scientific, or medical backgrounds, people whose minds are trained to recognize patterns and question reality. Jennifer never used that rest stop again. Her final log entry about the incident read, "Some places exist in multiple timelines simultaneously. Analytical minds may be more susceptible to temporal displacement than intuitive minds. Recommend avoiding Wellston Rest Area for drivers with scientific backgrounds." But late at night, when Jennifer passes the Wellston exit on the Oklahoma Turnpike, she can see the rest area's lights in her rearview mirror, long after she should have lost sight of them. And the digital clock always seems to be running backwards, counting down to some impossible moment when past and future intersect on a rain-soaked highway in the heart of Oklahoma. Story 5. The Crying Load. Thomas "Silent Tom" Anderson had earned his CB handle through 25 years of quiet professionalism on America's highways. He spoke only when necessary, kept his opinions to himself, and handled the loads other drivers wouldn't touch: hazardous materials, oversized cargo, and estate clearances that came with too many questions and not enough answers. Since his wife Margaret's death from cancer 3 months earlier, Tom had thrown himself even deeper into his work, taking the difficult hauls that kept his mind occupied and his heart from breaking completely. The load offer came on October 30th through a broker Tom had never worked with before. Estate furniture from a 1890s plantation house in Savannah, Georgia. Destination: Brunswick Auction House, 87 miles south. The pay was unusually generous, $3,200, for what should have been a $800 run. But the shipper's only requirements were complete discretion and no inspection of the sealed trailer contents. Tom met the shipper, a nervous man in an expensive suit who seemed eager to complete the transaction quickly. At the gates of Whitmore Plantation, a sprawling estate that had been abandoned for decades, the Victorian mansion loomed against the October sky like something from a Gothic nightmare, its broken windows staring blindly across overgrown gardens where Spanish moss hung like funeral shrouds. "Everything's loaded and sealed," the man said, handing Tom the paperwork without making eye contact. "The family just wants it gone. No questions, no delays. The auction house is expecting you by dawn." Tom's manifest listed standard estate items: antique furniture, children's belongings, household goods, approximate weight 31,000 pounds. Nothing unusual, except for the shipper's obvious anxiety and the way he kept glancing at the sealed trailer as if expecting something to escape. Tom hooked up the trailer, performed his standard pre-trip inspection, and pulled onto I-95 South. At 11:47 p.m., the Georgia swamplands stretched endlessly on both sides of the highway, a primordial landscape of Spanish moss, black water, and ancient cypress trees that predated human civilization. Dense fog rolled across the asphalt like ghostly fingers, reducing visibility and creating an atmosphere that made even experienced drivers nervous. At exactly 3:33 a.m., the crying began, soft at first, barely audible over the rumble of Tom's diesel engine, the sound of an infant whimpering in distress. Tom checked his mirrors, scanned the highway for other vehicles, and verified his CB radio wasn't picking up transmissions from nearby traffic. The sound was coming from inside his sealed trailer. Tom pulled onto the shoulder and climbed out into the humid swampland air. He walked the length of his trailer, checking every seal, every door, every possible entry point. The trailer was completely secure, locked with the shipper's own seals, and according to his manifest, contained only furniture and household goods. But the crying continued, not one infant now, but multiple children, their voices rising and falling in a heartbreaking chorus of distress that reminded Tom of the miscarriages he and Margaret had endured during their 20-year marriage. 5 pregnancies, 5 losses, 5 tiny graves in the Riverside Cemetery back home in Ohio. Tom climbed back into his cab, hands trembling as he keyed his CB radio. "Any driver out there picking up unusual sounds on Channel 19? This is Silent Tom, southbound on I-95, near mile marker 67. Static," answered him, Then, impossibly, the crying sounds began transmitting through his CB radio speakers. Even though the radio was set to receive, not transmit, other drivers would be hearing the infant voices across hundreds of miles of highway. But Tom's radio showed no outgoing transmission. The crying followed a precise pattern, beginning at exactly 3:33 a.m., lasting exactly 33 minutes, featuring the voices of what sounded like 12 different children ranging from newborns to toddlers. Each voice was distinct, individual, heartbreakingly real. At 4:06 a.m., the crying stopped with supernatural abruptness. Tom had 23 years of perfect safety record, unblemished compliance, and a reputation for delivering cargo exactly as contracted. But the sounds from his trailer were breaking his heart and challenging his sanity. Against every regulation and professional instinct, Tom made a decision that would haunt him. For the rest of his driving career, he broke the trailer seals. The trailer doors swung open to reveal not furniture and household goods, but a carefully arranged nursery from another century. Antique cribs lined both walls, their white-painted wood yellowed with age but somehow still pristine. Children's clothing hung from tiny wardrobes, christening gowns, baptismal outfits, small white shoes that had never been worn. Rocking horses stood frozen in mid-gallop, their painted eyes seeming to follow Tom's flashlight beam. At the center of the trailer sat an ornate rocking cradle, its carved oak sides depicting angels and cherubs. The cradle rocked gently back and forth despite the absence of any breeze, and steam rose from within as if the wood itself was breathing. Tom approached the cradle with the same reverence he'd felt standing beside Margaret's hospital bed during their final goodbye. Inside lay a collection of infant clothing from the 1890s, tiny gowns, miniature bonnets, impossibly small shoes, all arranged as if a baby had just been lifted from the cradle moments before. But the clothing was warm to the touch. Tom's flashlight illuminated a brass nameplate mounted on the cradle's headboard. Sarah Elizabeth Whitmore, born March 15, 1894. Called home October 31, 1894. Beloved daughter. Below the nameplate, additional brass plates listed 11 more names, all with birth dates in 1894 and death dates of October 31, 1894. Tom's phone had no signal in the deep swampland, but he used it to photograph the nameplate and conduct research. When he reached the auction house in Brunswick at dawn, what he discovered made him understand why the plantation owner had been so eager to dispose of the children's belongings. The Whitmore plantation, yellow fever epidemic of 1894 had claimed the lives of 12 children between the ages of 6 months, and for years, all dying within a span of 3 days in late October. The epidemic began with Sarah Elizabeth Whitmore, the plantation owner's youngest daughter, and spread through the slave quarters and nearby settlements before burning itself out. All 12 children had been buried in white clothing, in tiny coffins crafted by the plantation's carpenter from the same oak used to build the rocking cradle. The epidemic ended on October 31, 1894, exactly 129 years ago to the night. When Tom arrived at the Brunswick auction house, the staff insisted the manifest was incomplete. According to their records, the load should have included an ornate rocking cradle as the centerpiece of the children's furniture collection. But when Tom opened his trailer for unloading, the cradle was gone. Security footage from the auction house loading dock showed Tom unloading furniture around empty space where a large item should have been, his movements suggesting he was carefully maneuvering a heavy object that wasn't visible to the cameras. Tom returned to the Whitmore plantation that afternoon to report the missing cradle. The property had been sold and demolished during the morning hours, bulldozed into rubble before Tom could return. But among the debris, Tom found the brass nameplate from Sarah Elizabeth's cradle, still warm to the touch despite the autumn air. Tom never took another estate clearance job. He kept the brass nameplate in his cab as a reminder that some cargo carries more than physical weight, it carries the accumulated grief of generations, the unfinished business of lives cut short, and the eternal love of parents who refuse to let their children face eternity alone. Margaret's death certificate, which Tom carried in his wallet, showed she died on October 31st, the same date as the Whitmore children. The same date Tom encountered their spirits, crying for parents who had been dead for 129 years. Sometimes the loads we carry choose us, not the other way around. Story 6. The Hitchhiker Who Wouldn't Leave. Michael Big Mike O'Sullivan had been running the Pacific Coast Highway for 18 years, hauling everything from Seattle salmon to California wine between the ports of the Pacific Northwest and the produce markets of Los Angeles. His Irish Catholic upbringing had given him a healthy respect for the supernatural, but his practical trucking experience had convinced him that most ghost stories were just fatigue, loneliness, and too much coffee talking. That changed on November 12th at 4:15 a.m. in the thick coastal fog that transforms Northern California's Highway 1 into a tunnel of gray isolation between the towering redwoods and the invisible Pacific Ocean. Mike was 3 weeks into grief counseling following his mother's death from Alzheimer's disease, struggling with guilt over her final months in the nursing home and his inability to visit more often due to his demanding cross-country routes. Bridget O'Sullivan had raised 6 children alone after his father's death in Vietnam, and Mike had always been her favorite, the one she called Mickey when he was small, the one who sang Irish lullabies with her during her lucid moments in the care facility. The fog was so thick that Mike's headlights barely penetrated 15 feet ahead of his Kenworth W900, forcing him to reduce speed to 35 miles per hour and follow the white center line like a lifeline through the gray void. No other traffic was visible in either direction. Highway 1 between Eureka and San Francisco was lonely enough in clear weather, but nearly abandoned in conditions like this. At exactly 4:15 a.m., Mike became aware that he wasn't alone in his cab. An elderly woman sat in his passenger seat, wearing a simple blue dress from the 1960s and a small silver cross around her neck. She appeared solid, real, completely normal, except Mike had no memory of stopping to pick her up, no recollection of her climbing into his truck, no explanation for how she'd appeared beside him in a locked cab traveling down a deserted highway. "Hello, Mickey," she said, in a voice that was almost familiar, tinged with the faintest trace of an Irish accent. "It's been a long time." Mike's hands gripped the steering wheel tighter as he processed the impossible situation. Only his mother had called him Mickey, and this woman somehow knew his childhood nickname. "Ma'am, I'm sorry, but I don't remember picking you up." "How did you? You were always such a good boy," the woman interrupted gently. "Even when you were small, falling off your bicycle and scraping that knee so badly. Do you remember? You didn't cry, not even when I cleaned the gravel out with iodine. So brave." Mike's blood chilled. The scar on his left knee was hidden beneath his jeans, a barely visible mark from a childhood accident that only his family knew about, and the detail about the iodine. That was exactly how his mother had treated the wound 43 years ago. "Who are you?" Mike whispered. The woman smiled, and her features began to shift subtly, becoming more familiar with each mile. "You know who I am, Mickey. You've been talking to me every night since the funeral. All those prayers you've been saying, asking for forgiveness. I've been listening." The resemblance was unmistakable. Now this was his mother, or something wearing her face, her voice, her memories. Bridget O'Sullivan, at age 65. Before the Alzheimer's had stolen her mind and left her staring at walls in the nursing home, no longer recognizing the son who visited every Sunday. "Mom," Mike's voice broke on the word, "but you died 3 weeks ago. Death is just another highway, Mickey. And I've been waiting for you at the next rest stop." Bridget's ghostly hand reached over to pat Mike's arm, and he felt the familiar warmth of her touch. "We need to talk about that last visit, when you couldn't bear to stay. When you walked out because seeing me like that broke your heart." Mike's eyes filled with tears as the guilt he'd been carrying crashed over him like a Pacific wave. His final visit to the nursing home had lasted only 10 minutes. He'd walked in to find his mother staring blankly at a soap opera. No recognition in her eyes, no response when he called her name. He'd kissed her forehead and left, unable to handle seeing the brilliant woman who'd raised him reduced to a confused stranger. She'd died 2 days later, while Mike was hauling a load through Montana, unreachable by phone. "I'm sorry, Mom. I should have stayed. I should have been there when." "Hush now," Bridget's spirit said, her voice taking on the commanding tone he remembered from childhood. "There's no guilt to carry here. I knew you loved me. I felt it every time you visited, even when I couldn't show it. For the next hour, as Mike navigated through the fog-shrouded curves of Highway 1, his mother's spirit shared memories with perfect accuracy, stories from his childhood that only she could know. Family secrets that had never been spoken aloud. Details about his father's letters from Vietnam that she'd never shown to her children. But gradually, the conversation took a darker turn. "You're so tired, Mickey," Bridget whispered. "Driving these dangerous roads, working so hard, carrying so much guilt. Why don't you rest? Just for a moment?" Mike's eyelids felt suddenly heavy. The fog seemed to be closing in, and his mother's voice was becoming hypnotic, soothing, irresistible. "There's a curve ahead, Mickey. A beautiful curve that overlooks the ocean. If you just turn the wheel slightly to the right, we can be together forever. No more loneliness, no more guilt, no more missing me." Mike's hands began to respond to his mother's suggestion. The steering wheel turned incrementally toward the right, toward what he now realized was a 300-foot cliff dropping into the Pacific Ocean. His mother's voice was no longer comforting, it was commanding, demanding, pulling him toward reunion. "Through death, just a little more to the right, Mickey. Then we'll never be separated again." The sound of his CB radio crackled to life, breaking the supernatural spell with harsh static and the voices of other truckers warning about fog conditions. Ahead, Mike snapped back to full alertness just as his front wheels touched the shoulder at the cliff's edge. He yanked the steering wheel left, feeling his trailer swing wide before straightening out safely in his lane. When Mike looked to his right, the passenger seat was empty. Security footage from rest stops along Mike's route, obtained later through insurance investigation, showed Mike talking animatedly to his empty passenger seat for over an hour. The cameras recorded no one entering or exiting his truck. No additional heat signature in the cab. No evidence of any passenger other than Mike's own reflection in the window. But Mike's testimony was consistent, detailed, and supported by psychological evaluation. Dr. Sarah Martinez, a grief counselor specializing in trucking industry trauma, explained that Mike had experienced maternal attachment, grief, manifestation, a phenomenon where recently bereaved individuals project their deceased parents' personality onto hallucinations that initially provide comfort, but gradually become manipulative and dangerous. Highway 1 between Eureka and San Francisco has documented 23 cases of passenger manifestation since 1987, all involving recently bereaved drivers, all occurring in heavy fog conditions that create sensory deprivation, environments conducive to hallucinations. But Mike's experience included details that couldn't be explained by psychology alone. The elderly woman he'd seen matched perfectly with a 1963 missing person, reports Eleanor Vasquez, age 67, disappeared while hitchhiking on Highway 1, near the same location where Mike encountered his mother. Eleanor's family had been searching for answers for 60 years. Mike never drove Highway 1 alone again, but sometimes, in his rearview mirror during foggy nights along the Pacific coast, he sees an elderly woman standing by the roadside with her thumb extended, waiting for a ride that will take her home to a family that's been dead for decades. And sometimes, when Mike passes that spot where he almost drove off the cliff, he whispers a prayer of thanks to whatever force sent those CB voices to break his mother's supernatural hold, because he learned that night that love can be dangerous when it refuses to let go, and that sometimes the dead don't want to save us from joining them. Story 7. The Phantom Hitchhiker. Carlos Road King Mendez had 37 reasons to avoid Route 666 through New Mexico, and every one of them was rooted in his grandmother's warnings about loss. Espiritus del Deserto, the desert spirits that prowl the Four Corners region where Colorado, Utah, Arizona, and New Mexico meet in a knot of ancient Native American sacred ground. But the load paid too well to pass up. Agricultural equipment from Farmington to Gallup, a straight shot down what truckers still called the Devil's Highway, despite the government's attempt to rename it. Highway 491, in 2003. December 21st, winter solstice. The longest night of the year found Carlos piloting his Crimson Peterbilt 379 through the high desert at 12:01 a.m., his dashboard Saints metal swaying with each mile marker passed. The temperature had dropped to 17 degrees, and not another vehicle had shared the highway for over an hour. In Mexican-American trucking culture, December 21st, on Route 666, was considered the most dangerous night to drive. The night when the boundary between worlds grows thinnest, and the spirits walk freely among the living. At mile marker 47, headlights caught a figure standing beside the highway, a young man. Early 20s, wearing jeans and a flannel shirt, inappropriate for the freezing temperature. The man waved urgently, his breath visible in the headlight beams as he flagged down Carlos's approaching truck. Carlos downshifted and pulled onto the narrow shoulder, his Catholic upbringing compelling him to help, despite his grandmother's warnings. The young man approached the passenger door with quick, grateful steps, and Carlos leaned over to roll down the window. "Man, thank God you stopped," the hitchhiker said, his voice carrying a slight accent that Carlos couldn't place. "My car broke down about 2 miles back. Engine just died on me. Could you give me a ride into Shiprock? I can call someone from there." Carlos studied the young man's face, handsome, earnest, with dark eyes that seemed oddly familiar. Something about him triggered a memory Carlos couldn't quite grasp, but the freezing night air made the decision simple. "Climb in, hermano. Too cold to leave anyone out here." The hitchhiker swung up into the cab with surprising agility, settling into the passenger seat as if he'd ridden in Carlos's truck many times before. "I really appreciate this. Name's David, by the way. David Yazzie. Carlos Mendez. Road King." On the CB, Carlos pulled back onto the highway, noting that his passenger wore no jacket despite the bitter cold. And his clothes seemed to belong to a different era. The flannel pattern and jean cut reminded Carlos of his father's old photographs from the 1990s. "You know, Carlos, I've been waiting for someone like you to come along," David said, settling back in his seat with an odd smile. "Someone who understands the old ways, the old stories. Your grandmother taught you well." Carlos's blood chilled. He'd never mentioned his grandmother, and David's knowledge of family teachings seemed impossible. "How do you know about my grandmother?" "The same way I know about your wife Maria's pregnancy," David replied calmly. "The same way I know about your father's drinking problem, and your brother's arrest last month. The desert tells stories too. Those who listen." The cab temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees, despite the heater running full blast. Carlos could see his breath fogging the windshield, and David's reflection in the passenger window appeared strangely translucent, like a double-exposed photograph. "Where exactly did you say you wanted to go?" Carlos asked, his voice tighter now. "Take the next right. Cemetery Road. It's about 3 miles up." Carlos's GPS showed no cemetery road in the area, but David provided turn-by-turn directions with the confidence of someone who'd traveled this route countless times. The narrow dirt road led deeper into the high desert, winding between ancient rock formations that seemed to glow eerily in the moonlight. "You know, Carlos, I've been making this trip for a while now," David continued conversationally. "Waiting for drivers who take this highway on the solstice. Drivers like you, who come from families that understand death isn't always the end of the story." "What are you talking about, man?" Carlos's hands gripped the steering wheel tighter as the dirt road climbed into increasingly desolate terrain. "I died on this highway 3 years ago," David said matter-of-factly. "December 22nd, 2021. Car accident at mile marker 47, same spot where you picked me up. Icy patch sent my Chevy into a rollover. DOA at the scene." Carlos slammed on the brakes, his truck sliding slightly on the loose gravel before coming to a stop. "What the hell are you talking about?" David's form seemed to flicker like a candle flame in a wind, becoming more translucent with each passing second. "Check your mirrors, Carlos. What do you see?" Carlos looked in his rearview mirror. David's reflection wasn't there. The passenger seat appeared empty in the mirror's image, despite David sitting directly beside him. "This is impossible," Carlos whispered, but his grandmother's voice echoed in his memory. "En el decir, muchacho, lo imposible se vuelve verdad en las noches más largas." "The impossible becomes truth on the longest nights," David said, echoing Carlos's grandmother's exact words in perfect Spanish. "I've been waiting 3 years to deliver a message, Carlos. A warning." The dirt road ended at an old Native American cemetery, headstones and traditional burial markers scattered across a windswept mesa. David pointed to a specific grave near the Santera modern granite headstone that seemed to gleam in the moonlight. "That one's mine," David said. David Yazzie, December 3, 1999, to December 22, 2021. But here's the thing. Hermano, tomorrow's date isn't December 22, 2024. It's December 22, 2021. Carlos stared at the headstone, his mind struggling to process the impossible information. According to the grave marker, David Yazzie had died tomorrow, but 3 years ago. Time itself seemed to be folding in on itself in this high desert cemetery. "I don't understand," Carlos said. "At 6:47 a.m. tomorrow morning, you're going to hit black ice at mile marker 73. Same stretch where that woman trucker, Sarah Torres, had her close call," David explained. "Your truck will jackknife, slide off the highway, and roll 4 times down that embankment. They'll find your body thrown clear of the cab, neck broken on impact." David's form was becoming increasingly ghostly, his voice echoing as if from a great distance. "But it doesn't have to happen, Carlos. I'm here to change your future, the same way someone changed mine." "What do you mean?" 3 years ago, I was supposed to die on December 21st in that car accident at mile marker 47. But a ghost trucker driver who died in 1973 on the same stretch warned me about the ice patch. He told me to change my route, take Highway 64 instead. I listened, and I lived an extra day." David pointed to additional graves nearby. "All of us died on Route 666 on winter solstice nights. All of us were warned by previous victims. It's our job now to break the cycle, to warn the living before they join us." Carlos felt the truth settling into his bones like desert cold. "So, if I change my route tomorrow, ... you live. Your son gets born in March like he's supposed to. Maria doesn't become a widow at 26. The cycle breaks for another year." David's voice was fading to a whisper. "Take Highway 64 to Gallup tomorrow. Carlos, trust the ghost trucker who's trying to save your life." As the first pale light of dawn crept over the mesa, David Yazzie's spirit faded completely, leaving Carlos alone in his truck beside a cemetery that had no business existing on any map. But the grave was real, the warning was real, and Carlos's GPS showed him exactly 3.2 miles from mile marker 47 on Route 666. Carlos drove straight to the nearest truck stop and called his dispatcher, requesting a route change for his return trip. Highway 64 to Gallup instead of Route 666. His dispatcher grumbled about the extra miles, but approved the change. At 6:47 a.m., on December 22, 2020, one exactly when David had predicted his death, Carlos was safely traveling Highway 64, 40 miles away from the ice patch that formed at mile marker 73, on Route 666, the New Mexico state. Police report showed a massive black ice accident at that exact location and time, involving 3 vehicles, but no fatalities, thanks to an anonymous CB radio warning about hazardous conditions. Carlos never drove Route 666 on December 21st, again, but every year on the winter solstice, he monitors CB Channel 19, around mile marker 47, listening for other drivers who might need a warning about tomorrow's dangers. Because he learned that night that the dead don't always want to hurt you sometimes. They want to save you from joining them in an eternal patrol of America's most haunted highways. And sometimes, Carlos swears he can still hear David Yazzie's voice on the CB radio, warning other drivers about ice patches that won't form until tomorrow, speaking across time to save lives that haven't been lost yet. Story 8. The truck stop that wasn't there. Patricia Stormchaser. Williams had built her reputation on being the trucker other drivers called when weather turned deadly. Over 12 years of long-haul driving, she'd navigated through tornadoes in Kansas, blizzards in Minnesota, and ice storms in the Appalachians that left lesser drivers stranded for days. Her weather tracking equipment was more sophisticated than most local news stations, and her Kenworth T680 was equipped with every possible safety modification for extreme conditions. But the blizzard that struck I-70 through central Kansas on January 8 challenged even Patricia's expertise. The National Weather Service had issued blizzard warnings, but Patricia had cargo that couldn't wait temperature-sensitive pharmaceuticals bound for Denver hospitals, with a delivery deadline. That meant the difference between life and death for patients in intensive care. She'd driven through worse conditions, she told herself, as her truck battled through horizontal snow that reduced visibility to the length of her hood by 11:30 p.m. Patricia was questioning her decision. The blizzard had intensified beyond all forecasts, with wind gusts approaching 70 mph and snowfall rates exceeding 3 inches per hour. Her GPS showed 43 miles to the next truck stop in Salina, but the highway was becoming impassable. Other vehicles had vanished from the road entirely. Patricia's headlights illuminated an empty wasteland of white deaths stretching endlessly in all directions. At 11:47 p.m., salvation appeared through the swirling snow-bright lights cutting through the blizzard like a beacon. A truck stop, fully operational, with dozens of big rigs in the parking lot and the warm glow of a diner promising shelter from the storm. Patricia had driven I-70 through Kansas hundreds of times and couldn't remember a truck stop at this location, but emergency conditions played tricks on memory and geography. She guided her truck through the blizzard toward the lights, grateful beyond measure for any refuge in the white hell surrounding her. The truck stop appeared, remarkably well maintained despite the brutal weather. The parking lot was plowed. The fuel islands were operational, and the main building glowed with inviting warmth. Patricia parked between two other trucks and hurried through the blinding snow toward the entrance. Her jacket inadequate against the Arctic wind, inside, the facility felt like stepping back in time. The architecture, decor, and even the staff. Uniforms belonged to the late 1980s. The waitresses wore bright pink polyester uniforms with name tags reading Brenda and Dolores. Their hair teased into styles that hadn't been fashionable since Reagan was president. The lunch counter featured red vinyl stools and a pie display case filled with desserts that looked like they belonged in a Norman Rockwell painting. "Terrible night to be on the road, honey," Brenda said, guiding Patricia to a booth near the window. "You're lucky you found us. Most places between here and Colorado are shut down tight." Patricia accepted a menu with prices that made her do a double take. Coffee for 75 cents. Pie for $1.50. A full truck driver's breakfast for $3.99. Either this was the most affordable truck stop in America, or something was seriously wrong with the situation. "Excuse me," Patricia asked Brenda, "but what year do you think it is?" Brenda laughed, a sound tinged with something that might have been sadness. "Well, it's 1987, of course." "December? No. Wait, January 8th, 1987. Why do you ask, honey? You feeling all right?" Patricia's blood chilled. According to her phone, the date was January 8th, 2024. But her phone showed no signal. No data connection, no GPS coordinates. The only working communication was an old rotary payphone mounted on the wall near the restrooms. Other truckers filled the diner, men in flannel shirts and trucker caps, discussing CB protocols and highway routes with terminology that belonged 2 decades past. Their conversations referenced current events from 1987, the Iran-Contra scandal, the stock market crash, movies that had been forgotten long before Patricia started driving. "How long have you folks been stuck here?" Patricia asked a driver at the next table. "Since Christmas Eve," he replied without looking up from his coffee. "Storm's been going for weeks now. Management says it'll pass soon, but it just keeps getting worse out there." Patricia stared out the window at the swirling snow. Which Christmas? This past Christmas. Christmas Eve, 1987, of course. Worst blizzard in Kansas history. Radio says it might not break until spring, but it was 2024. Patricia had been driving through a 2024 blizzard when she found this truck stop. The man was claiming to have been stranded for over 36 years, waiting for a storm that had ended decades ago. Patricia approached other stranded drivers, gathering their stories with growing horror. Each claimed to have arrived during the Christmas Eve blizzard of 1987. Each had been waiting for the weather to improve. Each seemed completely unaware that decades had passed while they sat in this impossible refuge. "I need to use your phone," Patricia told Brenda, pointing to the rotary phone near the restrooms. "Sure thing, honey. Local calls are a dime." Patricia dropped a modern quarter into the coin slot. It worked. She dialed 411 for directory assistance, and an operator with a distinctly 1980s telephone manner helped her connect to the Kansas Highway Patrol. KHP Dispatch, a voice answered. This is trucker Patricia Williams, stranded at a truck stop on I-70. Can you tell me the current date and weather conditions? Ma'am, it's January 8th, 1987, and we're dealing with the worst blizzard in state history. Most highways are impassable. Where exactly are you located? Patricia's hands trembled as she described her location. The dispatcher confirmed a truck stop, operating at those coordinates, the Crossroads Travel Plaza. Owned and operated by the Murphy family since 1962. How many people are stranded there? The dispatcher asked. Looks like maybe truckers, plus staff. Jesus. We've been trying to reach that location for days. Radio communications went down Christmas Eve. Are you folks all right for food and fuel? Patricia looked around the diner, fully stocked, fully operational, as if, frozen in time, we seem to have everything we need here. But that was the problem. They had everything they needed to remain trapped forever, comfortable prisoners in a truck stop that existed outside of normal time, where Christmas Eve 1987 never ended and the blizzard never passed. Patricia spent what felt like 2 hours exploring the facility, documenting its impossible nature. The newspaper vending machines contained papers dated December 24th, 1987. The TV in the driver's lounge showed programming from that era. The jukebox played hits from the late 1980s. Even the cash register was a mechanical model that hadn't been used in decades. But when Patricia checked her phone, only 15 minutes had passed since she'd entered the building. Time itself was distorted inside the Crossroads Travel Plaza, flowing at a different rate than the outside world. The guest registry at the front counter told the real story, pages and pages of signatures dating back to Christmas Eve, 1987. Names, dates, hometowns, all from truckers who'd sought shelter from the blizzard and never left. Patricia recognized some of the names from missing person reports she'd heard on CB radio over the years, at what felt like 3 a.m., but registered as 11:52 p.m. on her phone. Patricia made her escape decision. She approached the exit doors, noting how other drivers and staff members seemed to avoid that area of the building. You're not leaving, are you, honey? Brenda asked, appearing suddenly beside Patricia. The storm's worse than ever out there. You'll never make it to the next town. Through the windows, the blizzard did appear more intense, a wall of white death that promised certain doom for anyone foolish enough to venture outside. But Patricia noticed something crucial. Her truck's headlights were still visible in the parking lot, and other vehicles showed no accumulation of snow despite hours of heavy snowfall. I have to try, Patricia said. People are depending on me. The faces of the staff and stranded truckers changed subtly, their welcoming expressions becoming desperate, pleading, almost threatening. Please don't leave us here alone, one driver said. We've been waiting so long for the storm to pass. Patricia realized the horrible truth. These people weren't stranded by the blizzard. They were imprisoned by their own fear of facing it, trapped in a supernatural sanctuary that had become their eternal prison. The Crossroads Travel Plaza offered perfect safety at the cost of never leaving, never progressing, never returning to the real world. Patricia pushed through the exit doors and ran through the blizzard to her truck. The snow was deep, but not impassable, the wind fierce but manageable. As she fired up her engine and pulled out of the parking lot, she glanced back at the truck stop in her mirrors. It was gone, where the bright lights and welcoming building had stood moments before. Patricia's mirrors showed only an empty lot with a broken foundation barely visible through the snow. Her GPS confirmed she was at the site of the former Crossroads Travel Plaza, which, according to Kansas records, had been closed and demolished following the Christmas Eve blizzard of 1987. 14 truckers had died in that storm, their bodies never recovered from the truck stop wreckage. They'd been found weeks later when the snow melted, huddled together in the building's remains, apparently having survived 4 days on remaining food supplies before finally succumbing to the cold. But they'd never really died, Patricia realized. They'd been trapped in an eternal Christmas Eve, 1987, waiting for a blizzard that would never end and spring weather that would never come. Patricia's delivery reached Denver on schedule, and she Never mention her experience to anyone except a grief counselor who specialized in survivor's guilt, because sometimes the safest place to wait out a storm becomes the most dangerous place to remain. And sometimes the courage to face death is the only thing that saves you from a fate worse than dying. The Crossroads Travel Plaza still appears. Two stranded drivers during severe weather conditions on I-70 through central Kansas. But those who enter never leave, joining an eternal community of travelers who chose safety over uncertainty, comfort over risk, and permanent refuge over the dangerous journey home. Story 9. The Mirror Truck. James J. Jackson had built his reputation on two things: driving the cleanest, most meticulously maintained Peterbilt 389 on the interstate system, and never backing down from a challenge. His candy apple red big rig with custom chrome stacks, hand-polished aluminum wheels, and a paint job that costs more than most people's cars was his pride, his identity, and his weapon in the eternal competition between drivers on America's highways. March 15th found J eastbound on I-10 through the endless expanse of West Texas, hauling electronics from El Paso to San Antonio. On a crystal-clear night where visibility stretched to the horizon in every direction. The highway was straight as a rifle barrel, perfect for the kind of competitive driving that made trucking more than just a job. It made it a sport at 2 a.m. J's perfectly adjusted mirrors caught something unusual in the left lane, an identical Peterbilt 389, matching his candy apple red paint job, custom chrome work, and even the same J transport lettering on the doors. The truck appeared to be running parallel to his, maintaining exact speed, exact position, like a reflection that had somehow escaped from his mirrors and taken physical form on the highway. James keyed his CB radio. Eastbound Peterbilt in the left lane, you got your ears on. This is J in the red 389. Nice ride you got there, driver. The radio crackled with his own voice responding. This is J in the red 389. Appreciate the compliment, partner. You got good taste in trucks, James's. Blood chilled. The voice was unmistakably his own, same accent, same inflection, same CB protocol he'd developed over 16 years of long-haul driving. He glanced left at the mirror truck's cab and saw his own face looking back, complete with his Dallas Cowboys cap and the small scar above his right eyebrow from a childhood accident. What the hell is this? James muttered, accelerating to 70 miles per hour. The mirror truck matched his speed perfectly, maintaining exact spacing in the left lane. James dropped to 60 miles per hour. The mirror truck dropped to 60. James flashed his headlights. Mirror truck flashed back. Every movement, every adjustment, every decision was mirrored with supernatural precision. For the next hour, James engaged in an increasingly frantic competition with his doppelganger. He changed lanes. The mirror truck shadowed him. He increased speed to 75 miles per hour. The mirror truck matched. He activated his CB radio to call for help. The mirror truck's voice responded with identical pleas for assistance. Both voices transmitting simultaneously on the same channel. Other drivers on I-10 began responding to the strange CB transmissions. J, you've got some kind of echo on your radio, came a voice from a westbound trucker. Sounds like you're talking to yourself out there. I am talking to myself, James replied, his voice tight with panic. There's another truck identical to mine running beside me. Negative, J. I'm looking at your position through binoculars. I only see one red Peterbilt out there. You feeling all right, driver? James stared at his CB radio, then at the mirror. Truck clearly visible 20 feet to his left. Other drivers couldn't see it. To the outside world, only one red Peterbilt existed on I-10 that night. The competition escalated as James realized he was trapped in some kind of supernatural racing game with himself. The mirror truck began anticipating his moves changing. Lanes before James committed to the change, adjusting speed before James touched the throttle. The reflection was becoming the leader, and James was becoming the mirror. At 3:47 a.m., both trucks approached a mandatory weigh station near Junction, Texas. This would settle the question of reality scales don't lie, and official records would show which truck was real. James pulled onto the scale platform first, his truck registering exactly 78,340 pounds, according to his logbook calculations. The DOT officer emerged from the inspection booth and walked around James's truck, checking permits and conducting a standard inspection. But when the mirror truck pulled onto the adjacent scale, something impossible happened. James's truck registered 0 weight. The scale under his Peterbilt showed no load, no truck, no physical presence whatsoever. The mirror truck weighed exactly 78,340 pounds. "Sir, you need to move your truck off the scale," the DOT officer said, looking directly at James. "The platform's not reading any weight." "What are you talking about?" James climbed out of his cab, pointing at the mirror truck. "What about that identical truck right there?" The DOT officer followed James's pointing finger, looking directly through the mirror truck, as if it didn't exist. "Sir, there's no other truck here. Are you feeling all right? Maybe you should pull over and rest for a while." James stared in horror at the weigh station's electronic display board. It showed one truck on the scales, the mirror truck, with the correct weight, his license plate number, his DOT registration. According to the official system, James J. Jackson didn't exist. The mirror truck's driver, James's own face, wearing a satisfied smile, waved as he pulled off the scale and continued eastbound on I-10. James tried to follow, but his truck wouldn't respond. The engine ran, the gauges showed normal readings, but the Peterbilt remained stationary, as if the laws of physics no longer applied to him. At sunrise, as the first pale light crept across the Texas horizon, the mirror truck vanished completely. James's Peterbilt suddenly registered normal weight on the scale. His physical presence returned to the DOT computer system, and other drivers could see him again on their CB radios. But the experience had fundamentally changed James's understanding of identity and reality. He began researching his own past, and what he discovered explained the supernatural encounter in ways that challenged everything he believed about himself. James Martinez had died 5 years ago in a rollover accident involving a red Peterbilt 389 on March 15, 2019. The accident occurred on I-10 near Junction, Texas, the same location where James had encountered his doppelganger. The dead driver's physical description, truck specifications, and even his CB handle J matched perfectly. But James Jackson, the survivor, had no memory of being James Martinez. His driver's license, social security number, and employment records all showed continuous existence as James Jackson. Yet the similarities were too numerous to be coincidental. Dr. Rebecca Santos, a psychiatrist specializing in identity disorders, evaluated James's case and proposed a disturbing theory. James Jackson might be a psychological construct created by James Martinez's dying Minda. New identity formed in the moments between the fatal accident and death, so powerful that it had somehow manifested as a separate physical existence. The mirror truck encounter had been James Martinez's spirit attempting to reclaim his original identity, to merge the fractured personalities back into one complete soul. The weigh station experience showed which identity was real in the physical world, and which existed only as a psychological shadow. James never drove I-10 through Junction, Texas again. But every March 15th, truckers report seeing two identical, candy apple red Peterbilts racing side by side near the weigh station, their drivers competing in an eternal race for the right to exist. Sometimes identity is more fragile than we realize. Sometimes the person we think we are is just a reflection of who we used to be, projected onto the world by a mind that refuses to accept its own death. Story 10. The CB Radio Seance. William Old Bill Thompson had been trucking for 30 years and operating CB radios for even longer back. When you needed an FCC license and a call sign to transmit legally, his Kenworth W900L was equipped with the finest CB equipment money could buy: a Cobra 29 LTD with weather band, a Wilson 5000 antenna perfectly tuned for maximum range, and enough knowledge of atmospheric skip conditions to communicate with drivers halfway across the continent when conditions were right. Route I-77, through the mountains of West Virginia, was Old Bill's specialty, a challenging stretch of highway that climbed through the Appalachian ridges between Charleston and Beckley, where fog rolled through the valleys like ghostly fingers and CB radio signals bounced off the mountains in unpredictable ways. On clear nights, Bill could talk to truckers in Florida or Canada, thanks to atmospheric conditions that turned the mountains into natural radio repeaters. April 30th, Valpurgis night in European folklore, though Bill didn't know the significance. The kind of dense fog that transformed familiar highways into alien landscapes. Visibility dropped to less than 50 feet, forcing Bill to reduce speed to 35 miles per hour and rely entirely on the white centerline to navigate. Through the gray void that had swallowed the mountain highway, at 1:45 a.m., Bill's CB radio crackled to life, with unusual clarity despite the atmospheric conditions. Breaker 19, this is Iron Eagle eastbound on the Big 77. Anyone got their ears on out there? Bill recognized the voice pattern immediately. An older trucker using CB protocol from the 1970s. The terminology, cadence, and even the call sign Iron Eagle belonged to an earlier era of trucking, back when CB culture was more formal, and drivers took pride in proper radio etiquette. Iron Eagle, this is Old Timer in the eastbound Kenworth. I got a copy on you, driver. What's your 20? Old Timer, good to hear a friendly voice out here. I'm about 15 miles west of Memorial Tunnel, hauling steel pipe to Norfolk. You familiar with this stretch? Bill's scalp prickled. Memorial Tunnel was 40 miles ahead, but no trucker had hauled steel pipe through these mountains since the mills closed in the 1980s. Iron Eagle, what year are you showing on your calendar there, partner? Laughter crackled through the speaker, warm, genuine, tinged with sadness. Well, it's April 30th, 1973, last I checked. Why do you ask, old timer? Time got away from me there for a minute. Other voices joined the conversation, all using 1970s CB protocol and discussing routes, loads, and road conditions that belonged to a different decade. Bill recognized the pattern. He was somehow receiving CB transmissions from 50 years in the past, picking up ghost voices from truckers who had driven these mountains when Richard Nixon was president and the interstate system was still under construction. Breaker for Iron Eagle and the eastbound convoy, Bill transmitted, his voice steady despite his racing heart. This is Old Timer. I need to ask you fellows something important. What's the date and year where you're at? April 30th, 1973, came the immediate response from Iron Eagle. Why? What year are you showing, Old Timer? 2024, Bill replied. April 30th, 2024. Silence filled the CB channels for a long moment. Then Iron Eagle's voice returned, quieter now, more serious. Well, I'll be damned. Time travel through the airwaves. Never thought I'd see the day. The conversation continued for another hour as Bill slowly navigated the fog-shrouded highway. The ghost truckers shared stories from 1973, the fuel crisis, the 55 miles per hour speed limit, the CB radio boom that was transforming American highways. They discussed trucking companies that had been defunct for decades, CB channels that were no longer in use, and road conditions on highways that had been rebuilt multiple times since the 1970s. But as Bill approached Memorial Tunnel, the conversation took an urgent turn. Old Timer, listen up. Iron Eagle's voice became commanding, desperate. You need to turn around right now. Don't go through that tunnel. Why? What's wrong with Memorial Tunnel? Rockslide, coming at exactly 3:17 a.m. Big one. Cavern will block both lanes for 6 hours. You go through there at your current speed. You'll be right in the middle when she comes down. Bill checked his dashboard. Clock, 3:09 a.m. Memorial Tunnel was less than 5 minutes ahead at his current speed. His GPS showed no construction alerts, no traffic delays, no warnings about geological instability. Iron Eagle, my GPS shows the tunnel clear. How can you know about a rock slide that hasn't happened yet? Because it already happened, Old Timer. April 30th, 1973. 5 of us got caught in that slide. Didn't make it out. Iron Eagle's voice carried the weight of 50 years of regret. We've been trying to warn eastbound traffic on anniversary nights ever since. The other ghost voices joined in, pleading with Bill to take the alternate route through Beckley, to avoid Memorial Tunnel. To trust their warning despite the impossibility of their existence. Their concern was genuine, their fear palpable. Spirits of truckers who had died in the 1973 rockslide were trying to prevent Bill from sharing their fate. At 3:15 a.m., with Memorial Tunnel 2 minutes ahead, Bill made his decision. He took the next exit, following back roads through Beckley that added 30 miles to his route, but avoided the tunnel completely. At exactly 3:17 a.m., as Bill navigated through the town of Beckley, his CB radio erupted with emergency transmissions. From the present day, a massive rockslide had just blocked Memorial Tunnel on I-77, trapping 2 vehicles and requiring emergency rescue operations. The Geological Survey later confirmed that the slide was identical in location and scope to a previous collapse that had occurred on April 30, 1973. Bill's original route would have placed him in the center of the tunnel at the moment of collapse. The ghost truckers' voices faded with the sunrise, their supernatural CB transmission ending as daylight broke over the West Virginia mountains. But Iron Eagle's voice came through one final time, clear and strong. "Safe travels, old-timer. Maybe we'll talk again next April 30th. Bill researched the 1973 Memorial Tunnel accident and found newspaper reports confirming the details. 5 truckers killed in a rockslide on April 30th, 1973. The victims' names included Billy Iron Eagle Martinez, whose voice had guided Bill to safety 51 years after his own death. The West Virginia Department of Transportation confirmed that Memorial Tunnel had a history of rockslides on April 30th, 1989, 2003, and now 2024. Geological Survey showed the anniversary pattern corresponded to seasonal groundwater saturation that weakened specific rock formations on the same date each year. Old Bill never doubted the supernatural after that night. Every April 30th since, he monitors CB Channel 19 around Memorial Tunnel, listening for other drivers who might need a warning about tomorrow's dangers, because he learned that the CB radio can be more than just a communication device. Sometimes it's a bridge across time, allowing the dead to protect the living from repeating their final, fatal mistakes. And sometimes, when atmospheric conditions are just right and the fog rolls thick through the mountain valleys, Old Bill swears he can still hear Iron Eagle's voice on the radio, leading a convoy of ghost truckers through the eternal night, forever watching over I-77 through the West Virginia mountains. Story 11. The Cargo That Moved. Antonio Iceman Rodriguez had built his reputation on hauling the most sensitive cargo across America's highways: pharmaceuticals that required precise temperature control, medical equipment worth millions of dollars, and biological specimens that couldn't tolerate even minor temperature fluctuations. His refrigerated freightliner Cascadia was equipped with state-of-the-art cooling systems, backup generators, and monitoring equipment that would make a hospital envious. The call came on May 13th from Tampa General Hospital and, unusual late-night, pickup that paid 3 times the normal rate for medical transport. The dispatcher was vague about details, mentioning only biological specimens and emphasizing the critical importance of maintaining exactly 34 degrees Fahrenheit throughout the journey from Miami to Tampa. At 11:30 p.m., Antonio arrived at the Miami facility, not the main hospital as expected, but a nondescript warehouse in an industrial district near the port. The loading crew worked in complete silence, wheeling 5 covered gurneys into his trailer under the supervision of a nervous administrator, who kept checking his watch and glancing at the darkening sky. "Everything needs to arrive before dawn," the administrator explained, his voice tight with anxiety. "Temperature cannot fluctuate even 1 degree. These specimens are ... irreplaceable." Antonio performed his standard pre-trip inspection, verified his refrigeration unit was functioning perfectly, and pulled onto I-75 north through the Florida Everglades at exactly midnight. The highway stretched endlessly through the primordial swampland, a landscape of Spanish moss, black water, and cypress trees that predated human civilization. At 2:30 a.m., as Antonio navigated through a particularly dense stretch of swampland, the scratching began, soft at first, like fingernails dragging across metal. The sound came unmistakably from inside his sealed refrigerated trailer. Antonio checked his mirrors, verified his cargo doors were secure, and confirmed his refrigeration unit was maintaining perfect temperature. But the scratching continued, growing more deliberate, more urgent. Antonio pulled onto the shoulder and walked the length of his trailer in the humid night air. Every seal was intact, every lock secure. The trailer was hermetically sealed, designed to transport biological specimens without contamination. Nothing could get in or out. But something inside was definitely moving. The scratching evolved into a rhythmic pattern: 3 scratches, pause, 3 scratches, pause, like Morse code being tapped from within. Antonio's handheld radio crackled with interference, picking up what sounded like muffled voices speaking in medical terminology he didn't recognize. His GPS tracker, designed to monitor trailer movement independently of the truck, showed something. Impossible. The trailer was rocking back and forth, despite being stationary on level ground. The electronic monitoring system registered temperature spikes and drops that shouldn't occur with a functioning refrigeration unit at 3:33 a.m., the same time patterns from previous supernatural encounters. Antonio made the decision that would haunt him for the rest of his driving career. He broke the medical transport seals and opened the trailer doors. Inside, instead of biological specimens, he found 5 medical transport gurneys arranged like a makeshift morgue. Each gurney was equipped with restraining straps that showed the clear impression of human forms. And one gurney was generating heat despite the refrigerated environment. The metal rails were warm to the touch, and steam rose from the padding like breath on a cold morning. Hospital identification tags hung from each gurney: patient transfer, Tampa General, to County Morgue, May 13th. But the dates were wrong. Some showed May 13th, 2022. Others 2021, going back several years. All showed the same cause of death: hospital fire, smoke inhalation. Antonio's phone had no signal in the deep swampland, but he used its camera to document the scene. The photos showed empty gurneys, but the thermal imaging app revealed 5 distinct heat signatures in human form, lying on the supposedly empty stretchers. Research conducted later revealed the horrifying truth: Tampa General Hospital had experienced a devastating fire on May 13, 2019, killing 5 patients in the intensive care unit. The victims' bodies were supposed to be transported to the county morgue for autopsy. But the transport vehicle, driven by a contractor named Miguel Santuzad, vanished somewhere in the Everglades. Neither Santos nor the bodies were ever recovered. Antonio realized he wasn't transporting biological specimens. He was carrying the spirits of fire victims who had been lost in the swampland for over 4 years, unable to complete their final journey to proper burial. The supernatural activity intensified as Antonio stood in the trailer. The gurney wheels began moving on their own, rolling back and forth, as if the invisible patients were restlessly trying to sit up. The temperature dropped dramatically, despite the refrigeration unit working in reverse, trying to warm the compartment. Antonio heard voices: 5 distinct people calling for help, describing smoke and flames, begging to be taken home to their families. One voice belonged to an elderly woman who spoke in Spanish, mentioning her grandchildren waiting for her funeral. Another was a young man asking about his motorcycle accident injuries, unaware he'd died in the hospital fire. At sunrise, as Antonio prepared to continue the journey to Tampa, the supernatural activity ceased completely. The gurneys returned to normal temperature, the voices stopped, and his GPS tracker showed normal readings. But when Antonio arrived at Tampa General Hospital, the medical staff insisted there had been no pickup scheduled from Miami. Security footage from the hospital loading dock showed Antonio unloading 5 gurneys that appeared empty to the cameras, carefully maneuvering around spaces where bodies should have been, but weren't visible to electronic monitoring. The Florida Department of Health confirmed that no biological specimens had been transported on May 13th, and no contractor named Antonio Rodriguez was scheduled for medical transport that night. But hospital records showed that May 13th marked the 5-year anniversary of the devastating fire that had killed 5 patients. Antonio never took another medical transport job. He kept detailed logs of his supernatural encounter, and his testimony helped authorities locate the crash site in the Everglades where Miguel Santos and his refrigerated transport truck were finally discovered, along with the remains of 5 fire victims who had been waiting for years to complete their final journey home. Story 12. The Way Station from Hell. Rebecca, heavy load, Martinez, new dot. Regulations better than most enforcement officers. She'd worked as a dot inspector for 3 years before switching to long-haul trucking. giving her insider knowledge of inspection procedures, weight limits, and the subtle corruption that sometimes infected the system. Her transition from inspector to driver had been motivated by guilt over violations she'd overlooked, safety infractions she'd ignored, and bribes she'd accepted during her time wearing the badge. June 6th found Rebecca hauling construction equipment from Billings to Great Falls, along a remote stretch of Montana highway that cut through endless prairies under an oppressive, overcast sky. Her Peterbilt 379 was loaded to exactly 79,850 pounds, safely under the 80,000-pound legal limit, with cargo properly distributed and all permits in perfect order. At 3 a.m., Rebecca's headlights illuminated a way station that shouldn't exist. The Harmony Junction way station had been closed since 1994, according to Montana.records. Its scales decommissioned and buildings abandoned after budget cuts eliminated funding for remote facilities. But the electronic signs were lit, the scale platforms appeared operational, and the inspection booth glowed with the harsh fluorescent lighting that made every trucker's heart sink. Mandatory inspection, all commercial vehicles flashed in. Lead letters across the entrance. Rebecca had no choice but to comply. Avoiding a mandatory way station was a federal violation that could cost her license and livelihood. As Rebecca guided her truck onto the scale platform, the electronic systems activated with the familiar beeping and mechanical sounds of a functioning facility. But something felt wrong. The scale platform showed recent maintenance and fresh paint, despite the station's supposed abandonment, and the inspection booth windows were covered with newspapers dated June 6, 1987 exactly. 37 years ago, the scale readout flashed several times before displaying an impossible number: 162,340 pounds. Rebecca's truck weighed less than 80,000 pounds, fully loaded. Yet the official dot scale showed she was carrying over 82,000 pounds of invisible cargo. A voice crackled through the intercom system. "Driver, please report to the inspection booth for mandatory review. You are severely overweight." The voice belonged to Dot Inspector Harold Wickham, a man Rebecca recognized from training manuals as a legendary enforcement officer who had died in a car accident in 1987. His photograph still hung in Dot offices across Montana as an example of uncompromising integrity and by-the-book enforcement. Rebecca climbed down from her cab and walked to the inspection booth, her hands trembling as she carried her logbook, permits, and registration. Inspector Wickham sat at a desk that belonged to another Aero manual typewriter. Paper forms and filing cabinets filled with violation reports going back decades. "Rebecca Martinez," Wickham said, without looking up from her paperwork. "Former Dot Inspector Badge 347, terminated for accepting bribes and falsifying inspection reports. You want to explain this overweight violation?" Rebecca stared at the man who should have been dead for 37 years. Wickham appeared solid, real, wearing the crisp uniform and stern expression she remembered from his training videos. "Sir, my truck can't possibly weigh 162,000 pounds. Something's wrong with your scale." "Nothing wrong with our scales," Wickham replied, pulling out a thick file folder labeled Martinez, Rebecca violations covered up. "But something's wrong with your conscience. This extra weight you're carrying. It's not cargo, Inspector. It's guilt." The scale readout outside became more specific, displaying categories that shouldn't exist. Truck weight, 79,850 lbs cargo weight, 31,200 lbs guilt weight, 51,290 lbs total, 162,340 pounds. "I don't understand," Rebecca whispered. Wickham opened her file and began reading. March 15, 2019. Failed to report cracked brake drums on Kowalski Trucking. Vehicle 447. Driver crashed 2 weeks later. Killed family of 4. June 8, 2019 accepted $500 bribe to overlook overweight violation on Martinez construction truck. Vehicle caused bridge damage costing taxpayers $2.3 million. September 22, 2019. Stop. Rebecca interrupted, tears streaming down her face. I remember all of them. 12 preventable accidents, Wickham continued relentlessly. 43 injuries. 7 deaths. All because you valued money over safety. convenience over integrity. That's a heavy load to carry, Inspector. The way station became a supernatural courtroom where Rebecca was forced to account for every violation she'd ignored, every bribe she'd accepted, every safety inspection she'd falsified during her 3 years as a DOT officer. With each confession, the scale weight decreased. I took money from consolidated freight to overlook tire violations. Scale drops to 151,000 pounds. I ignored brake problems on Summit Transport because they promised me a job. Scale drops to 139,000 pounds. I falsified inspection records to cover up maintenance violations that killed people. Scale drops to 126,000 pounds. The confession session lasted until sunrise, with Rebecca admitting to corruption that had directly caused accidents, injuries, and deaths throughout Montana and surrounding states. Each admission reduced the supernatural weight her truck carried, until finally the scale showed normal readings. 79,850 pounds. Weight acceptable, Inspector Wickham announced, his stern expression softening slightly. Conscience clear. You're free to continue your journey, Inspector Martinez. But first call the Montana Attorney General. Turn yourself in. Face the justice you've been avoiding. As dawn broke over the Montana prairie, the way station returned to its abandoned state, broken scales, boarded windows, weeds growing through cracked pavement. But Rebecca's confession had been recorded on her truck's dash camera, providing evidence of corruption that led to her arrest and the largest DOT scandal in Montana history. 12 trucking companies were investigated. 47 vehicles were taken off the road for safety violations, and a complete overhaul of the state's inspection system prevented countless future accidents. Rebecca served 18 months in federal prison, but testified as a key witness in the corruption trials that followed. The Harmony Junction way station appears only to former DOT inspectors carrying the weight of their past corruption. It's a supernatural courtroom where the dead demand justice, and the guilty must confess their sins before they can continue their journey on America's highways. Rebecca never drove through that stretch of Montana again. But sometimes, late at night on remote highways, she monitors her CB radio for other drivers who might be carrying invisible weight, the crushing burden of guilt that can destroy lives if it's never properly unloaded. Story 13. The Passenger Manifest. David Ghostwriter Park had earned his CB handle through 17 years of solitary driving, a lone wolf who preferred empty highways to truck stop conversations, silent miles to CB chatter. His photographic memory made him valuable for complex routes and sensitive cargo. But his antisocial personality kept him isolated from the trucking community. What his fellow drivers didn't know was that David harbored dark secrets hidden beneath his professional exterior. July 4th found David hauling agricultural equipment across Nebraska's endless prairies on I-80, straight shot from North Platte to Omaha through farmland that stretched to every horizon. Independence Day meant light traffic, empty highways, and the kind of solitude David craved. The clear night offered perfect visibility, yet an oppressive silence hung over the landscape like the calm before a supernatural storm. At 1 a.m., David approached the Lexington way station, a routine DOT checkpoint he'd passed dozens of times before, without incident. The electronic signs directed all commercial vehicles to report for mandatory inspection, and David guided his midnight black Kenworth T800 onto the scale platform with practiced efficiency. Inside the inspection office, DOT Officer Martinez reviewed David's paperwork with unusual scrutiny. "Mr. Park, I noticed you didn't file a passenger manifest for this trip." David looked up from his logbook, confused. "I'm traveling solo, officer. No passengers. According to our system, you're required to list all 12 passengers." "Officer." Martinez held up a computer printout that shouldn't exist. "Federal regulations require manifests for all occupants." David stared at the document. 10 official DOT passenger manifest listing 12 names with detailed personal information. He'd never seen the form before, had no passengers in his truck, and couldn't understand why the inspection system was demanding documentation for people who didn't exist. "Sir, there's nobody in my truck except me. This has to be some kind of computer error." Officer Martinez's expression hardened. "Mr. Park, falsifying federal transportation documents is a serious offense. Your manifest clearly shows 12 passengers, ages ranging from 19 to 40. Are you claiming these people don't exist? David read the names on the manifest, and ice water seemed to flow through his veins. The names were familiar, hauntingly, impossibly familiar. Sarah Collins, age 19. College student Michael Torres, age 45. Construction worker Jennifer Walsh, age 23. Nurse Robert Kim, age 31. Mechanic Lisa Martinez, age 28. Teacher Frank Kowalski, age 42. Factory worker Maria Santos, age 26. Waitress Kevin O'Brien, age 35. Salesman Amanda Chen, age 24. Store clerk Carlos Mendez, age 39. Landscaper Patricia Williams, age 33. Secretary Thomas Anderson, age 29. Security guard. Each name triggered suppressed memories that David had buried deep in his subconscious. Sarah Collins, the college student he'd picked up hitchhiking near Lincoln 3 years ago. She'd disappeared after their encounter, though David had told police he'd dropped her off safely at the bus station. Michael Torres, the construction worker whose car had broken down on a lonely stretch of highway near Grand Island. David had offered help, and Michael had vanished without a trace. I don't understand this manifest, David whispered, his voice betraying the first cracks in his carefully maintained facade. Then let me help you understand. Officer Martinez's voice took on an otherworldly quality, and his appearance began to shift. His uniform aged, his face became gaunt, and his eyes reflected an inner light that belonged to no living person. These 12 people have been riding with you for years. David, they've been waiting for you to acknowledge their presence. The way station office transformed around David. The fluorescent lights dimmed to the amber glow of dashboard illumination, and the walls became the interior of his truck cab. One by one, the 12 passengers materialized in the space around him, transparent at first, then becoming increasingly solid and real. Sarah Collins sat in the passenger seat, her college textbooks still clutched in her hands. You remember me now, don't you, David? You offered me a ride to the bus station, but we never made it there. Michael Torres stood behind the driver's seat, his construction hard hat still on his head. You helped me with my car trouble, remember? Said you knew a shortcut to the repair shop. Each spirit confronted David with memories he'd successfully suppressed, encounters along lonely highways where he'd preyed on stranded motorists, offering help that led to isolated locations where no one could hear screams. David's photographic memory, which served him so well in trucking, became a curse as every detail of his crimes returned with supernatural clarity. I never meant for anyone to get hurt, David lied, but the spirits saw through his deception. You've buried us at truck stops along your regular routes, Jennifer Walsh accused, her nurse's uniform still stained with the blood from her final moments. You used your knowledge of remote locations to hide our bodies where they'd never be found. The supernatural courtroom continued as each victim recounted their final moments, how David had gained their trust, led them to isolated locations, and murdered them to satisfy compulsions he'd hidden behind his professional truck driver facade. David's isolated personality and extensive highway knowledge had made him the perfect predator, able to hunt across multiple states without establishing patterns that would attract law enforcement attention. 12 people, Officer Martinez intoned, his voice now clearly belonging to one of David's victims. 12 families who never learned what happened to their loved ones. 12 graves scattered across truck stops from here to California. David's truck began moving on its own, pulling away from the way station despite his hands being off the steering wheel. The supernatural passengers directed his vehicle toward the Nebraska State Police headquarters in Lincoln, their collective will overpowering his attempts to regain control. You're going to confess, Sarah Collins announced. You're going to tell them where you buried us, so our families can finally have closure. For 3 hours, David's truck drove itself through the Nebraska night, while the spirits of his victims guided him toward justice. His photographic memory provided perfect recall of burial locations, dates of murders, and details of crimes that spanned 5 years of cross-country trucking. At sunrise, David's truck arrived at the Nebraska State Police headquarters and parked itself in front of the main entrance. David climbed out of his cab, walked through the front doors, and confessed to 12 murders, providing exact locations for each buried victim, detailed descriptions of the crimes, and a complete timeline of his activities as a serial killer. The FBI investigation that followed confirmed every detail of David's confession. All 12 victims were recovered from the locations he provided: truck stops, rest areas, and remote locations along David's regular routes. The families finally had answers, closure, and bodies to bury properly. David Park was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, but the supernatural justice had been served before the legal system ever became involved. The passenger manifest that had triggered his confession was never found. In official records, existing only as evidence of supernatural intervention that brought a serial killer to justice. The 12 victims had finally completed their longest journey, not as passengers in David's truck, but as spirits seeking justice for crimes that had gone undetected for years. They'd used the weight of their collective presence to force their killer to face the consequences of his actions, proving that some passengers never truly leave the vehicle until justice is served. Story 14. The route that doesn't exist. Marcus Arias 50. Johnson had built his reputation on hauling loads that other drivers wouldn't touch: classified cargo for defense contractors, shipments with mysterious destinations, and routes that required security clearances most truckers didn't possess. His fascination with UFOs, government conspiracies, and Area 51 made him the perfect driver for loads that needed to disappear into the Nevada desert without questions or documentation. August 15th found Marcus piloting his stealth black Peterbilt 389 down Highway 375, officially known as the Extraterrestrial Highway, carrying electronics for a technology company in Las Vegas. The new moon provided absolute darkness across the high desert, and not another vehicle had shared the highway for over 2 hours. The isolation was exactly what Marcus expected on Nevada's most remote highway. At midnight, Marcus's GPS system suddenly activated without input, displaying a route modification that shouldn't exist. Instead of continuing south toward Las Vegas, the navigation system directed him to take an unmarked exit onto a road that appeared on no official maps, not even the classified military charts. Marcus had studied, during his years of conspiracy research, GPS rerouting. New destination: Facility Delta 7. Distance: 47 miles. Estimated arrival: 1:30 a.m. Marcus had never heard of Facility Delta 7, and his electronics equipment shipment was supposed to be delivered to a warehouse in Henderson, but the GPS override was compelling, professional, and accompanied by electronic authentication codes that suggested official government authorization. The unmarked road was perfect: asphalt recently paved, professionally maintained, and equipped with reflective markers that guided Marcus deeper into restricted airspace. Electronic signs provided turn-by-turn directions in the same government standard fonts used for Area 51 perimeter warnings. But these signs referenced a facility that existed in no official documentation. Marcus's CB radio began picking up encrypted government transmissions, tactical communications between security teams, aviation control chatter discussing incoming delivery vehicles, and technical discussions using scientific terminology that belonged to classified research projects. His truck's electronic systems behaved erratically as he approached certain coordinates, with dashboard displays showing interference patterns that suggested proximity to powerful electromagnetic equipment after 37 miles of desert highway that officially didn't exist. Marcus crested a ridge and saw Facility Delta 7 spread across the valley below a massive underground complex with surface installations that dwarfed the legendary Area 51. The facility extended deep underground, with multiple levels visible. Through transparent sections, an advanced aircraft that belonged decades in the future sat on runways cut into the desert floor. Security personnel waved Marcus through checkpoints, as if his arrival was expected and scheduled. The guards wore standard military uniforms but carried weapons and equipment that seemed beyond current technology: energy-based systems, scanning devices that analyzed his truck's cargo without physical inspection, and communication gear that operated on frequencies his CB radio couldn't detect. "Welcome to Delta 7, Mr. Johnson," announced a security supervisor who somehow knew Marcus's name despite no prior contact. "Proceed to Loading Bay 7. Your cargo transfer is scheduled for 1:30 a.m. Marcus followed illuminated guidance systems, through the facility's surface complex, passing laboratories, aircraft hangars, and research buildings that contained technology he'd never imagined. Scientists in hazmat suits worked on projects that involved energy systems, materials that defied physics, and aircraft designs that suggested either incredibly advanced human engineering or reverse-engineered alien technology. At loading bay 7, facility personnel unloaded Marcus's electronics shipment and replaced it with sealed containers. Labeled only with alphanumeric codes, the new cargo manifest showed a destination that existed in no atlas. Site 52, coordinates 37.24331, NA 115.7930W, depth 347 meters underground. Mr. Johnson, you'll deliver this cargo to Site 52 and return immediately, explained a facility administrator whose civilian clothes couldn't hide his military bearing. The route will be provided by your GPS system. You'll encounter no other traffic, and the delivery must be completed before sunrise. Marcus tried to photograph the facility with his phone, but the camera malfunctioned in ways that suggested electromagnetic interference. When he attempted to record audio, his device produced only static. The facility seemed designed to defeat any attempt at documentation, existing in a bubble of technological denial. The journey to Site 52 led even deeper into classified Nevada territory, through desert valleys that didn't appear on any satellite imagery Marcus had ever studied. The coordinates provided by his GPS pointed to a location that should be empty desert, according to Google Earth. But Marcus's truck descended into an underground facility, even larger than Delta 7. Site 52 was a subterranean city multiple levels, extending hundreds of feet underground, populated by personnel who moved with military precision through corridors that could accommodate aircraft. The delivery bay, where Marcus unloaded his mysterious cargo, was large enough to serve as spacecraft, equipped with systems that suggested either incredibly advanced human technology or actual alien engineering. "Excellent work," Mr. Johnson said, a medical technician who approached with injection equipment. "Your delivery is complete. Now we need to discuss your security clearance." Marcus attempted to escape, running for his truck, but the facility's security systems locked down automatically. Blast doors sealed the loading bay, and armed personnel surrounded his vehicle with weapons that hummed with energy-based technology. "Mr. Johnson, you've delivered classified materials to a facility that officially doesn't exist," explained the medical technician. "Federal law requires memory modification to protect national security interests. The injection contained experimental compounds that induce selective amnesia, erasing Marcus's memory of the past 6 hours, while leaving his trucking knowledge and general memories intact." Marcus awakened 200 miles away, in a truck stop parking lot with no recollection of deviating from his original route to Las Vegas. But evidence of his supernatural journey remained. Marcus's phone contained encrypted text messages he didn't remember receiving, written in codes that suggested government communication protocols. His delivery receipt showed payment for transporting cargo to coordinates that satellite imagery showed as empty desert. And his truck's GPS system retained route data for roads that existed on no official maps. The most disturbing evidence was medical. Blood tests revealed injection sites and chemical compounds that belonged to no commercial pharmaceutical manufacturer. Marcus had been subjected to experimental memory modification using drugs that existed in no public medical database, suggesting access to classified research projects that operated decades ahead of acknowledged science. Marcus's investigation into his lost 6 hours led to contact with other truckers who reported similar experiences: missing time, mysterious deliveries, and memory gaps associated with driving in Nevada's classified territories. But government agencies refused to comment on the incidents, and satellite imagery showed only empty desert at the coordinates where Marcus claimed to have made deliveries. The most chilling discovery was historical. Marcus's route data matched coordinates for Site 52, a rumored government facility that conspiracy researchers claimed had been operational since the 1950s. But according to official sources, no such facility existed, and the coordinates pointed to land that had never been developed for any purpose. Marcus never took loads through Nevada's classified territories again. But his experience proved that some routes exist outside normal geography highways that appear only for specific deliveries, facilities that operate beyond official acknowledgement, and government projects that use civilian truckers to transport materials between installations that officially don't exist. Sometimes, the most dangerous cargo isn't what you're carrying, it's what you've seen, and what they'll do to make sure you forget it. Story 15. The Final Haul. Sound of cross-country highway, multiple engine notes harmonizing ethereal atmosphere. Robert Old-Timer Sullivan had seen America's highways change over 35 years of long-haul trucking, from the CB radio revolution of the 1970s through the GPS era of the 2000s. From independent owner-operators to corporate megafleets. At 68 years old, with over 3 million miles on his logbooks, Robert was ready to hang up his keys after one final cross-country haul from Seattle to Portland. A symbolic journey that would take him coast to coast before retirement. March 20th found Robert behind the wheel of his immaculate 1987 Peterbilt 379, the same truck he'd purchased new 37 years ago, maintained with obsessive care, and driven through every state in the Union. The load was simple: vintage furniture for an antique dealer in Maine, nothing complicated or time-sensitive. This was supposed to be a leisurely farewell tour, a chance to say goodbye to the highways that had been his life. But as Robert pulled onto I-90 westbound at sunset, something felt different about this journey. The highway seemed more familiar than usual, as if he'd traveled this exact route countless times before. Other truckers on the CB radio sounded like voices from decades past, using terminology and call signs from earlier eras of trucking culture. At exactly mile marker 347, the same marker that had trapped Marcus McDonald in an endless loop, Robert's truck began experiencing the phenomena from all 14 previous supernatural encounters. First came the time distortion. The mile marker repeated itself every 4 minutes, just as it had for Marcus, but Robert recognized the pattern immediately. His decades of experience had prepared him for the impossible, and he navigated through the supernatural loop with practice. "Calm, been waiting for you, old-timer," crackled a familiar voice on his CB radio. It was Billy Iron Eagle Martinez, the ghost trucker who had been warning drivers about black ice for 50 years. "We've all been waiting for you to make this final run." As Robert continued eastward, the phantom convoy from Story 3 appeared, in formation around his truck, 3 1970s big rigs, running perfect escort. Their chrome gleaming in the moonlight, the ghost drivers waved through their windows, welcoming Robert into their supernatural fraternity. The rest stops along his route displayed the backwards time anomalies that Jennifer Kim had encountered, but Robert moved through them with understanding, rather than fear. The crying sounds from his trailer matched Thomas Anderson's experience with the plantation children, but Robert recognized the voices as spirits seeking peace, not torment. Each supernatural encounter built upon the previous ones, creating a gauntlet of highway horrors that would have terrified any other driver. But Robert faced them with the calm acceptance of a man who had spent his entire adult life on America's most haunted highways. "You're starting to understand, aren't you?" asked a new voice. On the C. B. David Yazzie, the phantom hitchhiker who had saved Carlos Mendez from the ice patch death. "This isn't your first time making this run, old-timer. You've been driving this route for 37 years. The truth began crystallizing in Robert's mind as he encountered the hitchhiker who wouldn't leave, the mirror truck that questioned identity, and the way station that demanded confession. Each supernatural phenomenon had been trying to tell him the same story, a story he'd been too busy living to understand. At the CB radio seance near Memorial Tunnel, Robert finally heard his own voice among the ghost truckers trying to warn eastbound traffic. His call sign, old-timer, had been broadcasting warnings to other drivers for decades, even though he had no memory of the conversations. "Robert Sullivan," announced Inspector Wickham at the Supernatural Way Station, "died March 22, 1987. In a 15-truck pileup during a severe ice storm on I-80 near North Platte, Nebraska. Truck and driver never recovered from the wreckage." The passenger manifests at the DOT inspection showed not 12 murder victims, but the names of 14 other truckers who had died in the same accident, drivers whose spirits Robert had been encountering throughout his supernatural journey. Each story had been a fragment of collective memory, from the massive crash that claimed 15 lives 37 years ago. "The route that doesn't exist," Robert whispered, understanding finally washing over him like sunrise over the prairie. "I've been driving a route between life and death, helping other drivers navigate the supernatural highways." His GPS showed coordinates that placed him at the crash site, not in Maine, where he thought he was heading, but back in Nebraska, where his journey had ended 37 years ago. The antique furniture in his trailer was actually the personal belongings of the 15 truckers who died in the 1987 blizzard, finally being delivered to families who had never received closure. "Your final delivery isn't to Maine, old-timer," explained the familiar voice of his dispatch, who Robert now realized had been dead longer than he had been alive. "It's to the memorial service. Your own memorial service. The one they never got to hold, because your body was never found." As dawn broke over the Nebraska landscape, Robert's truck pulled into the parking lot of St. Michael's Cathedral in Lincoln. Inside, families and fellow truckers had gathered for a memorial service that was 37 years overdue. Robert's wife Margaret sat in the front pew, now 86 years old, but still beautiful, still waiting for her husband to come home from his final run. Robert watched from the back of the church as his trucking colleagues shared stories of his kindness, his professionalism, and his dedication to helping other drivers on America's highways. His grown children spoke about missing their father, about growing up without the man who had promised to be home for Christmas, 1987, but never made it past the Nebraska ice storm. Robert Sullivan spent his entire career helping others, eulogized his best friend, Jake Morrison. Even after he died, truckers reported seeing old-timers Peterbilt helping stranded drivers, warning about hazardous conditions, and appearing whenever someone needed assistance on the highway. If there are guardian angels for truckers, Robert was one of them. As the service concluded and mourners filed past Robert's memorial finally erected with the recovered personal effects from his trailer, Robert felt the weight of 37 years lifting from his shoulders. His supernatural journey had been a gradual awakening to his own death, a long process of accepting what had happened during that March blizzard in 1987. The 14 ghost truckers from his supernatural encounters appeared around him in the church: Marcus, Sarah, Roberto, Jennifer, Thomas, Michael, Carlos, Patricia, James, William, Antonio, Rebecca, David, and Marcus from Area 51, all victims of highway deaths, all fellow travelers on the supernatural routes that connect the living and the dead. "Ready for the final haul, old-timer?" asked Iron Eagle Martinez, extending his hand. "The convoy's ready to roll." Robert took one last look at his wife, his children, and the life he'd left behind 37 years ago. Then he joined the phantom convoy of truckers who patrol America's highways for eternity, protecting the living from the dangers they faced in death. His 1987 Peterbilt 379 pulled out of the cathedral parking lot and disappeared into the morning mist, joining an endless convoy of ghost trucks that run the supernatural highways between worlds. Robert Sullivan's final haul had become his eternal route, forever helping other drivers navigate the dangerous roads of life and death. Sometimes the journey never really ends. Sometimes retirement means trading earthly highways for spiritual ones where the CB never goes silent and the convoy runs forever through America's most haunted stretches of asphalt. And sometimes, when conditions are just right and a trucker needs help on a lonely highway, old-timer's voice still comes through. On Channel 19, you got your ears on out there. This is Old-Timer, and I'm here to help you make it home safe.